series. Today's meeting will be recorded. And thanks to everybody on this workshop committee. You can see all the names up in the upper right-hand corner. Today's focus is ocean literacy from grassroots to global. It's the second in the series. And today our leads are Diana Payne from Connecticut Sea Grant and Lynn Whitley. Right. Next slide, Lynn. Thank you. So as I said, this is the second one in the series. If you missed the first one, it was Environmental Literacy 101, and you can go back and see the recorded video, the PowerPoints, and all the resources on the website, and we can put that link to the website in the chat for you. And then our third in the series will be on Tuesday, March 1st, same time, 3:30 to 5 Eastern time. It'll focus on fostering an environmentally literate society. And then our culminating event will be held at our SGEN meeting ahead of the NMEA conference, which I assume is still slated to be in person. Excellent. So that will be on Friday, July 8th this summer. Next slide. So the goal for today's workshop is really focusing on the ocean literacy campaign that we've been doing for, gosh, quite some time now. We want you to understand the history of ocean literacy and be knowledgeable about all the resources that we have in support of the ocean literacy campaign. We're going to work to align the ocean literacy principles with the 4 Sea Grant area focus areas. Yep, if we could go back to slide 3. Great, thank you. And the third goal is to apply what we've learned from Ocean Literacy Campaign to Sea Grant's environmental literacy efforts, and how we can do this both internally within Sea Grant and then externally for our audience members. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn to get us started on today's workshop.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Well, I'm Lynn Whitley. I'm with the University of Southern California, Sea Grant Emirate. I like that part. So happy to be back working with Sea Grant on these projects. And my co-host here is?
Hi, everybody. I'm Diana Payne. I'm the education coordinator with Connecticut Sea Grant, based at UConn's Avery Point campus in Groton, Connecticut.
Wonderful. So moving forward, we want to start with warming some brains up, getting some ideas going here. So we're going to move to a Jamboard, and I know that's going to get put into the link or into the chat. And what I want you to think about is, what do you think is the most important thing everybody should know about the ocean? You know, as an adult, getting out of high school, whatever your bottom line is, but functioning in society, what do you think the most important thing everyone should know about the ocean? So without further ado, I think we are going to go to the Jamboard link. And I am there, I believe. And there we go. So I believe the link is in the chat for you now. Look at that. There's things getting posted already. So put your thoughts and ideas. Some of them might get rearranged as we're putting these out. If you see them move, don't worry about it. So let's just get some good thoughts going up there. Okay, yeah. Sustains us all, whether you realize it or not. Absolutely. That can run between a couple. There we go. Ideas about the impacts on all of us. Yes, that's an important one. Good. Those are really important down here to stride those two. Excellent. And as you can see, some of these just are getting moved around. Different ones of us are driving here, but keep those ideas coming. And I will ask the timer person to keep track of us here. I think we're doing pretty good. So that's good. Okay. And there it is. Great. Okey-doke. This agenda. Good thoughts here. Oceans have changed over time, and ocean stuff can show up really surprising places. Okay. Well, I'm going to try over there. And again, Diana or anyone, feel free to move or add.
I like that somebody ripped mine out of my hands and moved. I was like, what's going on? Oh,
Right.
Sometimes what happens is that they all kind of pile up in one spot. So that was probably me. So I apologize.
no, it's
Just trying
totally
to
fine. It was
try to
very,
move them so we
it
can
was very
see them.
fun. I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Tug
Wait,
of
I wasn't
war
done
with my
with that.
cursor. Anyway, okay, carry on.
Good. Okay. So getting us
Yep.
any
We
more.
have just another minute or so. So if you want to put final thoughts in, and we will arrange these for you.
Right. Great. Oh, evolution. I'm going to try there. Yeah, that comes a couple of places. Put it under 3. So we've got some very interesting idea. Oceans, not oceans. That's really important. Singular ocean. Okay, it shapes us and we shape it. This one's a little harder to read. They've changed over time. Okay. The influence on Earth's climate, absolutely. Sea level rise is very real. And our climate and weather, the basis for our agriculture, leisure, etc., are inextricably tied to the ocean. Very, very true. Let's see. We've got, yeah, it is powerful. And here we can't live without it. And it sustains us. It's our main source of oxygen. Again, humans can't survive without it. And we kind of start to get into some life aspect. Most life resides in the ocean. Impact of all humans on the oceans, not just those on the coast. And it's full of life. And again, all life connecting with the ocean, and the oceans and humans interact. And ocean has shaped human history and evolution. And then we get into the issue. There is much to learn, both in terms of what is already known and what is yet to explore. And we've got one more down there. Humans are responsible for the health and care of the ocean. Very true. Any other thoughts or ideas? And shall we move back from there? We're good? All right, so we are going to go back to here. And we looked at those. A lot of good ideas came out of that. Really important. And for those of you that have already looked at it, you kind of are hopefully seeing that these ideas that you came up with and probably already knew are very, very important. And there's something called the Ocean Literacy Essential Principles. We'll be talking through different aspects of this the rest of the session, but the key things are that there's one ocean with many features. You picked up on a lot of that. The ocean and life shape the features, and life in the ocean shapes the features of the earth. It influences weather and climate, obviously makes Earth habitable. We couldn't be here without it. And it supports this great diversity of life and ecosystems, and this inextricable interconnection between ocean and humans is very key. And coming back to that same idea too, the ocean is largely unexplored. So you've hit on some key ideas that others have hit on. And I was going to do a little bit of an overview of how we got there, because we're looking at the challenge. So why is there a campaign for ocean literacy, and how do we define it and develop the framework? So here are 3 reasons at the time why representatives, they were from National Geographic, NMEA, COSI, the Centers for Ocean Science Education Excellence, Sea Grant, the College of Exploration, and NOAA. All of those organizations began working together in about 2004 to define what everyone ought to know about the ocean sciences by the end of high school in order to be science literate. And I think, as we all realize, you really can't be science literate unless you are ocean literate. So this was the challenge. How are we going to get to that spot? And the response was this. National Geographic's Oceans for Life project, which was in 2002, provided a model for bringing together the community of educators, scientists, and others who were concerned about the public's lack of knowledge of the ocean's role in their daily lives. So this was a big deal even back then. And the other key part of this is many organizations provided the backbone leadership to ensure that the process was as inclusive and as transparent as possible. And of course, one of the good results of that is we did get the definition for ocean literacy and 7 big essential ideas, essential principles, under which those 44 fundamental concepts were centered. But reaching consensus was a lot of work. But the process was what's so important. It helped ensure the resulting framework was adopted by many others who were not involved in the initial development. They could trust the process. And the network of the organizations that were involved also ensured that the results of our collective efforts has had longevity. And this is also important because of the ocean is the defining feature on our blue planet, and all life, as we well know, including our own, exists because of the ocean. Our lives depend now and forever on the health of the ocean. Understanding the ocean is essential to comprehending and protecting this planet on which we live. So the ocean literacy framework, which we will get more into as we move forward, it presents a vision of an ocean literate society and outlines the knowledge required to be considered ocean literate. So there is the basic definition and understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean. And note the use of the word ocean in the singular. This is because there really is only one ocean on this planet, and we're all connected to it. We wanted the words to reflect that concept, even though that kind of flies in the face of convention, but it is changing. And also note the 3 parts of this definition. Understanding alone does not make a person ocean literate. You've got to also be able to talk about it with others, kind of communicate that information in a meaningful way. And very importantly, apply what you know to make responsible decisions about marine resources and the ocean itself. So once again, those are the essential principles that we've gone over, and it just kind of makes it, we'll have connections to them so that you can see them just fine. And let's go to the next slide. And here in this slide, one of the really important things about, we know that there's, been the essential principles, and I will take back one to this one for a moment. In this one, all these essential principles are here. There have been some minor changes to some of the fundamental concepts over the years, but the principles do not change. And there have been very minor changes. So everything is available to you online to check all of that out. But the really cool part about this guide is it inspired, besides being what it is, it inspired many other networks and people to use it as a model for them. So we're going to talk about some of these in the next environmental literacy workshop, but this is just a sample of other literacy frameworks that were modeled on the Ocean Literacy Guide. Each includes a definition of the topic and a small number of big ideas supported by smaller underlying concepts. And of course, as you can see, they include everything from energy to climate, Great Lakes, earth science, all kinds of ways that it was used. So it was a great model for others using those same ideas. And with that, I think I would like to shift to building on the success of the guide and turn it back over to Diana.
Thank you, Lynn, for that great introduction on the history. So as Lynn just mentioned, the guide itself, so when we first developed the guide, we intended it to help ensure that there was ocean science content in national standards in the US because it was sorely missing. What we didn't anticipate was the global impact, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. But there are several resources for you to access. The NMEA Ocean Literacy web pages here on the bottom for you. And we bundled these into what we call the framework. So we have the Ocean Literacy Guide, which was just put in the chat for you a few minutes ago, so you can explore that. We also have a scope and sequence for grades K through 12 because we heard as soon as the ink was dry on the Ocean Literacy Guide, teachers wanted to know, how can I implement this in my classroom? So that provides them a method and means of using the essential principles and fundamental concepts in a way that they can implement it in their classrooms by grade band. After the National Science Education Standards were no longer used as the science content focus in the US, the next generation science standards were developed. And the Ocean Literacy Guide and the scope and sequence were literally in the room when NGSS was developed. So we did have some input into that process. As a matter of fact, several Sea Grant folks who were at the NMEA conference in Tennessee spent a good deal of time holed up in some of the conference rooms, writing some of the commentary that would ensure that the ocean science content was included in NGSS. And then the next step was for us to actually align the ocean literacy essential principles and fundamental concepts with the next generation science standards, with the DCIs, the disciplinary core ideas. And that is also available online as well at the NMEA website. Additionally, the International Ocean Literacy Survey was developed about 5 years ago, translated into 17 different languages. So all of these pieces of information together constitute, again, what we call the framework. Because the scope and sequence was out of print and the NGSS Ocean Literacy Alignment was never actually in print, we developed what we call a handbook for increasing ocean literacy. And this is an activity that was endorsed by the Ocean Decade, which again, I'll get to in a moment, but this is now available through NOAA's outreach office. They do only have one person who goes in like once or twice a month. So you will be able to get that through the outreach office. It will just take a little bit of time for you to receive that in the mail. We do also have some translations on the NMEA website of the guide and several other resources. Most recently, we found that there were some translations done in Greek. The Spanish translation is on its way. We had a couple of hiccups with that, with different types of Spanish translations, but that should be coming soon. But Portuguese, Italian, several other languages available on the NMEA website. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, this actually had even more impact than we ever could have possibly even imagined. Several organizations formed out of the basics of ocean literacy. So one of the first ones was the International Pacific Marine Educators Network, which formed during a conference, an NMEA conference in Hawaii in 2005. MC, the European Marine Science Educators Association, formed in Boston in 2011 at an NMEA conference. The Asia Marine Educators Association formed in 2015 in Newport, Rhode Island. And several other organizations, as you can see here, were all inspired by all of the efforts that we put forth with the Ocean Literacy Campaign. Next slide, please. And this one, I don't think we really saw coming at all. In 2017, UNESCO put together what they call Ocean Literacy for All, a toolkit. And this has several different activities as well as some vignettes from some scientists in the field and how they incorporate ocean literacy into what they do. So that is also available. The Ocean Literacy Portal, again, is a one-stop shop for international ocean literacy documents. So several of our documents are there, along with many other documents and lessons and activities. This is an ever-growing resource, so we can drop that in the chat as well. And then last year, just in January 1st, 2021, the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development kicked off. So a 10-year project, again, to really try and understand what ocean resources we currently have and what we want our ocean to look like in the future. There are several Ocean Decade outcomes. I won't go into all of the different components of the moving parts of the decade, but ocean literacy ties directly to Ocean Decade outcome number 7, an inspiring and engaging ocean where society understands and values the ocean in relation to human well-being and sustainable development. Next slide, please. One of the big ties also with the Ocean Decade, where we can see a direct link with ocean literacy, is one of the programs. And there's about 35 different programs within the decade. It's called, this one is called Ocean Literacy with All. On the right-hand side is a document that kind of outlined what this program was to look like. But the main goals are here on the left: to advance ocean literacy through international partnerships and networks, to design and implement transformative, locally and globally relevant research-based activities and projects by and for diverse stakeholders, and build capacity and behavior change to achieve an ocean literate society to help ensure sustainable development of the global ocean. Underneath, you can see several logos of several different organizations that are involved, including National Marine Educators Association and several of the organizations that I mentioned that were inspired by, informed because of the Ocean Literacy Guide. So this organization, this program rather, Ocean Literacy with All, we actually have our first steering committee meeting in 2 days. So please stay tuned for more information directly about that and how you can be involved with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was about the fastest history of ocean literacy campaign that Lynn and I have ever done. There is a lot more to it, but we can definitely give you more information. Some of you are old hats at this, you're very familiar with it, but we wanted to make sure that everybody was kind of on the same page when we were coming up to ocean literacy and trying to align ocean literacy fundamental concepts with Sea Grant focus areas. Now, you should be relatively familiar with the focus areas, and Lindsay or Lynn just dropped these in the chat for you. On the National Sea Grant website, there are connections, there are pages for all of these: healthy coastal ecosystems, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, resilient communities and economies, environmental literacy and workforce development. And we've also asked you to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, which is a community of practice. So it's not a focus area, but it is it's an important component of what we're doing within Sea Grant so far. And I just want to take a moment and just check and see if there are any questions in the chat. I know that Grace had one about a link. Yep, and we can put that in the chat in just a minute, where you can get the handbook. It's NOAA's outreach office, but I'll put the direct email in there for you. Any other questions before we move into our first breakout? Because we're actually doing very well on time. So if you do have any questions, this is a good opportunity.
We've covered a lot of stuff.
We did.
So any questions?
Can I ask a quick, I didn't know if we were supposed to do it in person. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead, Grace.
So, sorry, my question to you is, if you're talking to educators, and this is the first time you're sort of sharing the ocean literacy principles, what would you say is the most valuable, if you can hand them, would you recommend handing them something? And if you do, which one of the resources would you say is the best one to start with?
Lynn, do you have a comment on that one?
I would definitely jump in and say the Ocean Literacy Guide so that they get the basic essential principles, those ideas. And then as you can see from what Diana explained with the framework, it grows from there. You know, if they're a teacher, the scope and sequence document would show them specifically at what levels, what grades, how to integrate the parts of the Ocean Literacy Guide. And then again, she explained that we aligned it with the the NGSS. That's also helpful. And then of course, Ocean Decade. I mean, the survey is probably not as relevant to them, but I would definitely start with the Ocean Literacy Guide, and even an activity like what we just did, the idea to get people thinking about the important ideas first. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, and now I agree with that. And now you can, you're only giving them 2 documents really. You're giving them the folded up guide, and you can give them the handbook, because now the handbook contains scope and sequence and the NGSS alignment. So not all states are aligned to NGSS, but most of them are working on the big ideas of science. And this is still a very useful resource for folks that are not in NGSS states.
Perfect.
And Joshua has raised his hand.
I'm gonna follow up Grace's with a similar question, but replace educators with curmudgeonly bureaucrats who are trying to develop a national strategic plan and really don't get much time to think about anything. I noticed the guide is 13 pages long. That's pretty long in bureaucrat worlds. Got anything shorter?
So yes, so I can't show you this, but if you unfold the guide, if you have a hard copy.
I don't. Okay.
Okay. They are at the outreach office though. The latest version is at the NOAA outreach office. If you fold open the guide, the 7 principles and the now 45 fundamental concepts are all right there on that guide with pretty colors, and so you don't have to read the rest of it. The most important part for anybody to look at is that main fold out.
Just because I kind of got drafted to be involved in our national strategic planning, and I'm going to have a bunch of people that I need to hand something to fast.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
and as an aside, they're in development through the Ocean Decade is like an ocean literacy guide for policymakers. So that's all I can say about it right now until the kickoff next week, but I'll make sure that you get a link to that as well.
Thank you.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
That would be very helpful. Anything else before we move on?
Great question. So yeah, even if we don't get a chance to do them, have you unmute and ask them as you think of things, write them down and then put them in the chat when we're all back together.
That's fine. All right. Well,
Very good.
I will move us to the next slide. And that is going to be our first breakout session. And what we're going to be looking at is what Diana has talked about a little bit earlier, how the ocean literacy essential principles and fundamental concepts align with these sea grant focus areas. So in the breakout room, we're going to be sent to, Jackie will do her magic. We will each have a each breakout room will have a Jamboard, and it'll have a page for each focus area. And so it's a good idea to look through the Ocean Literacy Guide to see which things fit in the areas. And do note, principles and concepts may fit on more than one focus area. Diana, I did kind of jump in there. Is there anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, just if you could all please have open in front of you. We've put the link to the Ocean Literacy Guide in there, as well as the 4 focus areas and DEI, because what we're going to essentially ask you to do is to look at the fundamental concepts and try and align those to the 4 focus areas and DEI. And the way that we'll basically do that is there's going to be 5 breakout rooms. A couple of us have 2 principals. Some people only have 1, but you'll be randomly assigned to a breakout room, and we'll all kind of work together to brainstorm the alignments based on what principle you have been assigned in that room.
Right. And then we'll come back together and share our results. Okay.
And Joshua has another question, please.
No, this is actually a comment on the
Sure.
4 focus areas. DEI is a little different, but it applies. Keep in mind that these focus areas are intended to capture all the functions of Sea Grant. So thinking about research, extension, education, management, all
Communications.
communications. I always include them in outreach, and sometimes I get away with it, sometimes I don't. But think about that. That's the scope of these. I know there is a tradition that some are more heavily viewed as belonging to one function or another, but from the national perspective, we think of them as including all of the various functions. And if you also have that lens, it will make the outcomes of this even more useful.
Well, just to kind of, and I think Joshua's kind of been peeking into our Google Drive here, because we do have a document that we've been working on that we'll share with everyone as a result of this, where we have taken a stab at doing a very brief alignment. But we're going to take all the information that you guys generate today, and we're going to add that to our document. So we're hopeful that we can take the next 15, 20 minutes or so and really have a good discussion about this and see where we land.
Okay. All right. I think at that point, I need to press escape and go to the Jamboard. Let me just check.
Well, and
Yeah.
Jackie needs to put us in the rooms first.
I'm sending you now.
Okay. I think we are back.
Yep, we are. And so I think the next thing that we would like to do is have each of the facilitators report out just briefly, you don't have to go through each of the principles, but just give us an overview of what happened in your breakout room.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm happy to start and get that going. So we looked at principle 3, having to do with climate and weather in the ocean. And we looked at principle 4 about the ocean makes Earth habitable. Out of the principle 3, the bottom line is there's so many things that have to do with climate and that ocean interaction interface. We felt that particularly with sea level rise, hurricanes, things changing, that they were really relevant to almost every area. The Earth, the Elwood, as you say, and healthy coastal ecosystems, the resilient community economies, the fisheries, aquaculture, they just seemed to fit everywhere, and they were very important that way. And a good part that was brought up was that the DEI aspect of things in 3D, which really refers a lot to the warming and more intense hurricanes, that's affecting, not just as she said it, take the words out of her mouth, the people with the 3rd and 4th home in the coastal area, it's the communities that live there in islands. So that was very important. And in principle 4, I think it was also well said that it's kind of like, that's the foundation, the core of all the things that we're doing, in Sea Grant. It makes Earth habitable. So if Carrie or Michelle want to pop in, if I missed anything, please say so. Okay, we're good.
Okay. Lindsay, you want to go next?
Sure. We had number 5, the ocean supports a great diversity of life and ecosystems. And really, as we read through all the fundamental concepts, we kept going back to healthy coastal ecosystems and sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Really, just about any of the work we do under those 2 focus areas would align with something in principle number 5. Same thing with environmental literacy. We had a harder time seeing some of the direct connections without really stretching it to resilient communities and economies. And then we were actually talking about the idea that there are 7 principles. Great Lakes literacy, for example, has 8, and it adds that human component and the shipping component and just some other pieces to it that we're really interested in seeing how Great Lakes works through this same kind of process, and especially when you pull in the DEI section. Just because we have an entire principle, and I think a lot of things we can look at that through a DEI lens differently than what some of the, because really the ocean literacy principles are the ocean science literacy principles in a sense.
Great, thank you. And remember, as a caveat to that, remember why these principles were originally developed was to get ocean science content into the national standard. So yes, it's a weakness that we've recognized, but yes. Very good. Thank you, Lindsay. Linda is next on my screen here.
Yeah, we took them individually and then we came back and talked at the end, and thank you for the extra time that we got, and we still ran out of time. Because we had principle 6 and talking about humans and ocean are inextricably linked, and in Sea Grant, our work is all focusing on humans and our relationships with the environment. So a lot of that very much overlaps, in recognizing that the roles that we play in impacting healthy coastal ecosystems and the effects on climate and weather, for example. Definitely the work that we do in Elwood and developing that workforce and expanding there. We saw the same thing with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that all communities are being able to be involved and addressed, and reflecting the diversity of cultures that are absolutely within our country and within North America. And one of the topics that did come up is, how and where do we look at these as we move toward our strategic plans and think about, how are these changing and how will they relate in the future with the changes in strategic planning, if there are changes coming.
Great. Thank you very much, Linda. Lisa.
Hello. Well, we had the first principle, Earth has one big ocean with many features. And we felt that all of the fundamental concepts within that principle fall under the healthy coastal ecosystems, because it's looking at the ocean is the ecosystem. And then about half of them fell under the resilient communities and economies, and then only a couple of them related to the fisheries and sustainable fisheries and aquaculture focus area. And of course, all of it, fits into literacy and workforce development. And then, like everyone said, the DEI is the lens through which all of this is viewed through. So that was how our discussions went.
Very good. Thank you very much, Lisa. So my group had principle 2, the ocean and life in the ocean shape the features of Earth, and principle 7, the ocean is largely unexplored. One of the first things that came out of Tina's mouth was that Elwood fits for all of these. Thank you, Tina. So that was perfect. We did take a look at, again, both principles, and we're able to work with resilient coastal communities and economies for several, especially in principle 7, as well as healthy coastal ecosystems for several in principle 2. And we did have some DEIJ connections as well. One other thing that I did notice previously is that sometimes if you replaced the word coast with replaced ocean with coast, you can see a lot more connections. And we did talk a little bit about ways to make these connections more tangible and more explicit. So we may take that on as something to look at in the future. So now I think, Lynn, if you want to bring your screen back up, we're going to give you guys a quick break so that you can walk away from the screen for a few minutes, but if we can all get back here and reconvene in 5 minutes or less, that would be outstanding. And I'll hang out here in case anybody has questions.
All right.
Okay, so let's start coming back together so we can get ready for breakout number 2.
All right. Great. So. Okay. So we have everybody back. A few folks.
If you're back, just do us a favor and turn your camera on, even if it's briefly, just so we know you're here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well,
It's 4:35 by my clock, so I would say let's get started.
Okay. All right. So we are going to do what we did before, going into breakout rooms. Again, it'll be random, and we'll probably be with different people this time. And what we're looking at is we've really covered a lot of information. What can we learn from ocean literacy, and how can we apply this to environmental literacy and sea grant education? That's the most important part. So we'll go into breakout rooms, we'll brainstorm, we'll put some ideas, and we will report out. Diana, anything you would like to add to that?
No, I think that's good. Let's hop into the next breakout room. Okay, everybody, welcome back. Let's see, report out time. So I can go first and then we'll go around my screen.
Sure.
So we chatted a little bit about the fact that sometimes things kind of get pushed into environmental literacy. So sometimes like diversity, equity, inclusion kind of get pushed into just environmental literacy. Maybe that should be, in a broader context. And also that sometimes environmental literacy is seen as the conduit for other focus areas to kind of go through. And there's more to environmental literacy than just that. So we need to keep that in mind. Okay, so who's on my screen next? I see Lisa.
Hi. Oh gosh, that went faster than we were expecting it to. So a couple of the takeaways that we had was that the fact that the framework was built in a very clear and easy to understand way makes it easy for people to see what applies to them and where they fit in, and explains what they do, what they don't do. There's sort of a nonpartisan aspect to it. And so everyone can see something in there for them and how it helps them to advance their goals. Another thing was that Lynn pointed out how all of those agencies, partners came together to create it, making widespread acceptance and buy-in, and doing that with all of Sea Grant's personnel and not just the educators would be a great way. And I know that Tina was adding another thing that I haven't seen yet. So Tina, if you wanted to share your point.
Yeah, I think one of the experiences we've had is people not understanding the Sea Grant structure, the Sea Grant lingo, the jargon, and that if you're able to put it in a framework like the ocean literacy principles, it makes it easier to communicate to people who maybe aren't well versed in the Sea Grant Academy, Sea Grant Week kind of stuff. Just a thought.
Very good.
Yeah,
Thank you, Lisa and Tina, for sharing. Next on my screen, I see Linda.
Okay. So we talked about how, having that structure makes it easier to use the framework the way that it's set up. And then the way that it can be involved and used by others, like local governments can set up an opportunity in an oyster festival to share those principles on tables and to integrate across different efforts. we talked about how important it would be to involve and engage communicators more in reaching out to the media. That it would be really valuable to pull together examples like in ocean literacy of these principles in action, making it active. And also, how do we reflect this at a time where our world has changed so much since our visioning effort was developed, and how do we also be especially respectful and reflective of that in addressing these going forward? And lastly, just again, how to really engage the public in as strong of a way as possible, so that it is that ownership, that development of this is ours.
Very good. Very good points, especially I'm glad you tied it back to the visioning document. Thank you. Next on my screen, I see Lindsay.
We talked about, Michelle and I are both Great Lakes folks, and Grace joined us from Woods Hole. We talked about the idea that one of the things when we're working with our colleagues or really introducing literacy principles to folks is that word literacy. It's not just a read or write. If you say literacy, that's what most of the general population is going to think. But really, it's that three components of understanding, can accurately communicate, can make informed and responsible decisions. And that is more than just K-12, which again, we say education, most people envision classroom K-12. But the example we used, you could have an aquaculture farm, and you still need to be environmentally literate and be able to understand and accurately communicate and make informed and responsible decisions related to your business and the ocean. So just sort of how that transcends. And then the idea too, that it sometimes, and this is exactly why the Great Lakes literacy principles were developed, here in the lakes, when you keep saying ocean, 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 it's really hard for that connection to be made. But you say Great Lakes, or as Grace was saying, you say coastal. It's not that we aren't recognizing that there's one ocean, but we're finding ways to help our people connect and help them see the relationship between what they're doing with the overall principles.
Very good. Excellent points. Thank you, Lindsay. Lynn, I toss it to you to give your report out and wrap it up.
All righty. Well, there's been some wonderful things that have come out in the report out. Excellent. What we talked about a lot was the way the information comes across, that that's easier to absorb information if you kind of keep it to the principles, and then if people want more information, you can take them into the fundamental concepts. So a little bit of what Lindsay was just saying too with the environment, it's the same thing. You get to those key things and then can add more information. So a lot of our discussion was about keeping it simple and clear, crisper, sharper message. Short things are easier for people to follow. And another aspect of this was that it came from earlier, that these cross-cutting aspects of the principles and the Sea Grant focus areas are very valuable, that makes ways to support it. And the other key thing that came out was it's really important to always, and again, that's a Sea Grant thing too, look at the community you are serving and meet their needs. And that's what we did through the ocean literacy process. We listened to particularly the teachers that said, great idea, what do we teach? All of the things that we just discussed earlier in that history. So from that process, that was another key thing that can be used to re-emphasize in connecting with the community and serving and meeting their needs. So that is what our group came up with. And I just love hearing all these ideas. And I think unless people have other questions or anything they want to bring up.
Is it okay just to add one thing that came up in our session? And I'm not sure how to articulate this very well, but it's this exchange and these ways of knowing that it's really a two-way street, a two-way arrow, that there's a lot of knowledge and literacy that we can learn from not only Indigenous peoples, but the communities that live and work on the water, and just to keep that sort of open mind humbleness in all of this. And maybe throw aside the agenda or more of that, I don't know. It's just something that keeps coming up for me, is that sort of exchange of knowledge that can happen. That's not necessarily scripted.
Yes, absolutely. Very, very. That's where so many things come out, just kind of reacting to the people and respecting what you're hearing and having that real engagement. So that's great. Wonderfully put. Thank you, Carrie. Any other comments or questions? Okay, well then, I guess I don't really need to share my screen, but I'll go back and share my screen to, we've already had the breakout report, and we will then, I think I'm going to just put up our information. If you needed to get in contact with Diana or me, we're there. And so I think it's pretty easy to get in touch with us, and just also acknowledging these other groups that have been so involved with it. And at that point, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Lisa to look at the next steps.
Great, thanks.
From the team need to say anything else? I don't want to cut anybody off. I know we're getting to the end, but we have about 4 minutes, so.
All right. Well, if somebody does want to chime in, feel free to, but I'll just point out our next steps. So as we did with the first seminar, we have a post-session 4-question little survey we'd love for you to fill out. That you can get to that from this series website, and I believe that website address will be put in the chat again, but you should have it in your email. We've been sending it out a lot. Our next session is on Tuesday, March 1st, 3:30 to 5, Fostering an Environmentally Literate Society, and this will be the 3rd in the virtual series set. As of right now, there is no pre-session homework. So as of right now, nothing that we need you to read, look at, be thinking ahead of time, but that is subject to change. So if that does change, we will put we'll send an email out to everybody. Oh, and now that I look at the 4th bullet, there's that URL for the website where you can find all the sessions. If you missed part of today's or want to refresh your memory on what was discussed today, the links for the video, the PowerPoints, and all the resources will be posted to that website. And just a reminder that this is all part of Sea Grant had some visioning money. It funded us to create the environmental literacy vision plan. And then it also has funded us to have this training series for Sea Grant personnel, and to take what we've learned here out either to our Sea Grant colleagues in our state or to external stakeholders. So this is has funded a lot of the different state programs to engage in some more of this environmental literacy training and workshops. So do we have any questions from any of the audience members, or like Lynn said, did anybody on the planning committee have anything they'd like to share before we close for the day? It's so nice to see everybody. And I look forward to seeing you all again in just about 6 weeks, I think.
And if anybody has any other things, if you think of something later on, just shoot us an email, or the Jamboards will still be open. So feel free to keep adding to those.
Yeah, that's a great point, that those Jamboards, they'll stay there. So for any of them, if you think of something that you didn't get to share, please post that in there.
Okay. And Lisa, are we on the team staying on after the participants are off, or are we?
Yeah, probably for a couple minutes. I think that'd be great.
Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all.
Thanks.
Thank you guys for organizing this. We appreciate it.